Sevetri, thanks so much for joining us today. So this masterclass is based on your new book, Resilient, How to Overcome Anything and Build a $1 Million Business with or without capital. Is that right?
Yes, although I'll be focused primarily on the fundraising journey for startup founders and those interested in raising capital or building a business without capital.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So to introduce you to our audience, Sevetri Wilson is the founder and CEO of New Orleans-based technology startup Brasilia, with a second office in New York that she founded in 2016 to revolutionize how nonprofits are created and maintained, and how enterprises, think cities, private foundation, and corporations, can scale their impact. She has raised over $10 million for Brasilia to date. Let's just pause for a moment. $10 million for Brasilia to date. She's also the founder of Solid Ground Innovations, LLC, her first company, a strategic communications agency, and the author of Solid Ground, How I Built a Seven-Figure Company at 22 with zero capital. In 2019, Brasilia was named to VentureBeat's top startups to watch out for in 2019, and Sevetri to Inc. magazine's 100 female founders building world-changing companies, and to PitchBook's 27 leading Black founders and investor list. It's quite a stellar list of accomplishments, Sevetri. But it continues. She's also a 2010 recipient of the Nobel Prize for Public Service, the Jefferson Award, and her work was featured in the US Senate report to the White House on volunteerism in the United States. Her book, Solid Ground, spent 6 weeks at #1 on Amazon in the startup category. Sevetri's work and that of her clients have been featured in national publications such as USA Today, Time Magazine, and CNN. She serves as a voice for communities as a Forbes contributor and has amassed over 200,000 followers across social media with over 3 million monthly impressions from readers and followers. Ladies and gentlemen, I now present to you Sevetri Wilson.
Thank you so much for the introduction. That means that I'll kind of glaze over my bio since you gave a great bio for me. This session, and I love the name Master Builder, just primarily because I want to talk not only about raising capital, but growing a business without raising capital. Most people would think that because I have now raised several $1 million for my startup, that I am pro venture capital, pro raising capital for your business, if it's venture backable. But to the contrary, I'm actually someone who believes that if you can bootstrap your company, or if you can grow it to get as far as possible without raising capital, then do that. I ultimately decided to raise capital because of the unique type of venture that I was engaging in. As we mentioned, I started off in strategic communications. So building a business that primarily did not need outside capital. We were able to structurally grow employee by employee because we were a true strategic communications agency. Whereas with Brasilia, that wasn't necessarily the case because we were building software and we needed to really push out in market and capture a large component of our customer segment. And so just a little background that wasn't shared about myself. So I am from Louisiana. I'm a first generation student. So first generation college student, went to LSU, was the first in my family to do so and graduate from a university. Two, I'm a solo founder, double minority. I'm a woman, and as you can tell, I am African American, and I'm also a non-technical founder. A good friend of mine, Sherelle Dorsey, wrote an article when we announced our Series A founding, and she said Sevetri is from the South, she's a solo founder, she's a double minority, she's non-technical, she's essentially everything that they will say cannot raise capital, right? And so just wanted to state that because I feel particularly if you're in the South and you're raising capital in the South, it can seem like a huge hurdle, and it can seem very much so like you're strapped for resources or those who will even invest in your business. So just wanted to note that I definitely don't fit the spectrum of what most startup founders in the tech space look like. I bootstrapped my first company. So my first company, Solid Ground Innovations, I started at 22 and I bootstrapped to 7 figures without investment capital at all. So do you need money to build and grow a business? No, you don't. You don't need outside capital to do so. Again, everything is relative to the space you're in, to what you're trying to build. And yeah, I think that most people think, particularly today, because venture capital has definitely become more sexier and it's become more of a headline where more people are exposed to the fact that people can raise capital for their businesses. Fourth, my parents are deceased, and they left me with zero inheritance. And so doubling down on you can build and you can grow from anywhere, even if you didn't necessarily inherit anything to do so. Both of my parents are deceased. My mother passed when I was 21 years old, my father when I was just 8 years old, and they left me zero inheritance. So I had to really get out here and build my own network. I had to join other organizations to connect with people. I've From Baton Rouge, I've been on the Chamber of Commerce board to the Downtown Development Board. And this is someone who literally came to LSU as a undergrad freshman from a super small city, Hammond, Louisiana, not knowing anyone. And so really want to emphasize, it's all about networking and who you meet along the way that can help you begin to visualize or even realize your ultimate goals in business. I'm from a small rural town by way of New Orleans, which I just mentioned, Hammond. And as Mindy mentioned, I raised over $2 million in venture capital for my second company. So when I think about the idea of scaling your business, right, whether you bootstrap it or raising outside capital, bootstrapping is essentially building a business on little to nothing. Most bootstrap companies rely on personal income, which I did. I took money that I was making and I was reinvesting that into my business to get it off the ground. Savings, sweat equity, lowest possible operating costs. So you're trying to operate with inside of a business model that doesn't necessarily have large operating expenses early on. As I mentioned, I was in professional services. And so we primarily worked on consultancy-based projects. And so I was able to take money that I was making and reinvest that into the company. You're also usually in some type of business where there might be fast turnaround, and your approach to selling is essentially this cash only approach starting off. On the opposite side, raising outside capital is building a business and selling your idea to an investor in exchange for ownership equity in your company. And that's definitely something I think that people who have mostly come from a world of bootstrapping. When I started my first business, the idea of raising capital from outside parties was something that I was just completely unfamiliar with. The way I had naturally learned how to build a business was by watching other people do it and mentors that I brought on along the way. And many of them were very traditional business owners who had never raised capital in the way I have done today. But those who are seeking to raise outside capital, just know that there is exchange for that, for doing so. There's exchange of ownership in your company, and that can mean various different things down the road, which I'll get into in a little bit. And so why bootstrap to begin with? Either you choose to or you have to. I will say early on, I didn't know I had a choice otherwise, right? And so for me early on, I really had to. I didn't have resources. I didn't have investors really around me, or I wasn't exposed to the investment community. And so for the most part, most of my journey early on building a business came from means because I did what I had to do in order to get my business going and generate revenue into the business. And so most people bootstrap either because they have to or they choose to. You'll hear about founders of companies who now are worth $1 billion who actually have bootstrapped their businesses to that point, who chose to not raise capital. What oftentimes I see And one particularly from a friend of mine, he's the founder and CEO of Calendly, which is based in Atlanta. And when he first went out to raise capital, he could not raise capital, right? He went out, he couldn't raise capital for years. No one believed in the idea, that no one believed that Calendly could be this massive company. And now they're currently raising capital on what will make them a unicorn. And so going back to the idea of why do people bootstrap, which he did for years after he realized that he wasn't going to be able to raise capital, you either choose to or you have to. And so think about that as a parallel to your journey. If you can't raise capital, then what, right? Will you still have that, that hustle, that grind to continue to push through and build a company regardless? Will you be able to be just very greedy about other ways you can access what you need to continue to grow your company? Will you be able to stay lean enough for long enough to do so? And so those are some things to think about, reasons why people bootstrap and why others may not just have a choice to. And it's also this idea of natural versus artificial growth. I hate to use the word buying growth in the world in the age of social media, just because it means something completely different than necessarily what capital infusion does to companies. But we'll talk about the idea of natural versus artificial growth, right? This concept that if you're growing organically without an infusion of capital, your business is only going to grow so fast, right? So you only have access to X amount of capital or resources, and thus you can only do as much as you have. Whereas infusing capital into your business stimulates the business in a way that allows you to essentially grow faster, right? And so the idea of venture capital is to move the company and scale the company at a fast rate, faster than what you will be able to do if you did not have that capital infusion into your company. And so this idea of like buying growth, you could kind of put that in parallel to just having that infusion of capital. Another thing that infusion of capital allow us to do is hire more experienced team members. And so whereas with Solid Ground, I had to keep a really tight budget, I could only afford X amount of salary for individuals. When I was able to raise capital for Resilia, I was able to definitely leverage the idea of salary as well as equity in order to entice very experienced team members to come over to the company. And so this balance of equity as well as salary is something that venture capital gives you an edge on versus having this very limited budget and what you can do with just bootstrapping a company. Now, of course, there are other avenues, which we'll talk about, like loans that can help you grow your business, but that's definitely a different path than actually seeking out investor capital. So growing faster while bootstrapping, right? So some of the things that I thought about when I was bootstrapping my company, and a lot of mistakes I made along the way, just because I didn't know half of these things at the time, particularly being so young, starting a business. But one thing that I had to learn the hard way is that it's so critical to hire the right people. Who you hire, particularly early on in the business, can make or break your business, just because there's not only the cost of salary, but there's the cost that you put in to train individuals, benefits, and even when you lose them, right? The time lost in the process. And so the need to hire the right people is critical. And I will, for one, say that this is definitely something that all leaders have their ups and downs with. And I've been very intentional about putting other people around me to actually balance off, what my thought process might be for a candidate versus I fully seen even beyond what's just in front of me. And so bringing in some of my investors, bringing in board members to also field people is important. If you're just bootstrapping a company and maybe you're looking to hire your first person, have someone that's close to your mentor, your advisor, someone who can take a critical look at the person you're seeking to hire, just primarily because sometimes we fall in love with people because it's just like everything that we need, right? When in actuality, that could be farthest from the case. Focused on established revenue sources. And so bootstrapping a company, you definitely have to hone in on revenue. Also raising capital. If any of my investors are listening, which a few might actually be on this call listening, because they spoke at the conference as well. But there's a heavy focus on revenue sources, particularly when you're bootstrapping. And I would say differently, just primarily because now that we've raised capital for Resilia, we're heavily focused on revenue because we've always brought in revenue essentially since day one of the existence of our startup, but we're able to experiment in ways that a bootstrap company isn't often able to do so, right? And so we can run a campaign or we can spend money in a campaign to see if we can attach ourselves to a certain segment of our market or to expand against another vertical that might be new. But when you're bootstrapping, you have to get really laser focused on what are almost potentially like guaranteed revenue sources, and you can be a lot less experimental in that process. Also bootstrapping a business, you have to try to reduce your risk, right? And so some of the things that I just talked about is the process that you think about when you're reducing risk. So hiring the right people, trying to reduce risk there, reducing risk as it relates to the types of clients or customers that you're going after. And so just think about ways that you can reduce your risk as a business owner, particularly when you're bootstrapping a company. And most people are like, well, building any business is a risk. Yes, 100%, 100%. But I will say there are definitely things that I feel if I didn't have in my sphere of influence, like mentors and advisors who had built businesses before me, I don't think I would have been as successful just because they also informed me of just fail traps that I would potentially step on if I didn't watch out for certain things. You have to have the ability to be adaptable. If 2020 didn't teach us anything else, it taught us that we have to adapt and adapt quickly, particularly if you're in business, you have to do so. Number 5, which probably should be number 1, and if my investors are listening, they will be like, this definitely should be number 1 next to revenue. But the idea of focusing on your customer experience. And we recently had a great individual on for Team Retreat in which we talked about the customer experience. This is important, particularly if you're bootstrapping, but definitely across any type of sector and business industry, is the experience that your customers have, just primarily because 1, they'll refer other customers, they'll come back as repeat customers, and they'll leave reviews. And so I often tell those small businesses that I may have come across, and I know they're really trying hard to try and do everything they can to bring their business to a point of profitability. And because they're juggling so many different things that they can allow other things to slip and fall through, right? So not responding to a customer email complaint for days or not responding at all. Like all of those things add up. And so I definitely will hone in on focusing on your customer experience across the board. Reinvest in yourself. That's a big one for me. I'm always continuously like growing and trying to stay on the cutting edge of my sector and also learning from other industry experts. And so always reinvest the time, the energy, even the money in yourself so that you can be a standout. And then always think ahead. I think about, particularly when you're bootstrapping a company, you can be so much in the work on the day-to-day that you can't plan for what's around the corner, or you don't necessarily have insight around what could potentially happen. I always feel like if you want to grow, regardless of whether or not you're bootstrapping or not, you definitely have to have some ability to think ahead and plan for the future. As I mentioned before, there are other funding options. I talked about venture capital, which is the option that I selected. And so my fundraising journey was very interesting, primarily because the first $400,000 that we raised in the company was actually raised by angels. And so angels who, for the most part, were just high wealth individuals who I had met through my business career, actually bootstrapping my first company, and in Louisiana. And so oftentimes there is this idea that there isn't capital in Louisiana, albeit that it is not a lot. You definitely have to put yourself in the spaces and places where people who have capital to invest and do invest via angel syndicates or other methods are doing so. So just be mindful that there is capital in Louisiana. Having access to it and finding where the capital is definitely going to be very strongly aligned to your network. I know, unfortunate, but it is the case. And if I can access the network and capital, trust me, anyone listening to this can do it too. Crowdsourcing. So the idea of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding has been on the rise. I'm actually really great friends with several individuals who now raised over $1 million through crowdfunding, through CF regulated engines that are approved by the SEC to raise capital for the public. And so simply, like I said here, in simple terms, crowdsourcing is enlisting the services of a large number of people, typically online, to invest in your company. This is commonly now known as group economics. So this idea of like group economics, we can come together, we believe in this company, and we want to actually give anywhere between $100 to $250 to $10,000 or $20,000 or more via this crowdfunding platform. And so I know several individuals now who have gone down this route, where they have very strategically created campaigns to crowdfund from a large number of people. Now, one thing that I will tell people when they ask me about their business and they think that they will be successful in crowdfunding, although I personally haven't gone down this route, I do believe that those who I have seen do it successfully have also had backgrounds in business. And so they weren't new to the scene. They had created some track record of business in the past, and they had somewhat of a network, right, of people who were interested in investing. So those from first-time investors, first time putting $100, $250 in anything, to individuals who have been investing like for years, and they saw them put together this campaign and they were successful in raising the money. One thing that people don't tell you about the methods that people use to crowdfund is some of them actually run ad campaigns, right? And so when you go on these crowdfunding platforms and you see a campaign actually highlighted, or you may see a campaign like pop up in your window, sometimes they're actually running ads so that they can get their story, their company in front of the right people and hopefully entice them to invest. To have a successful campaign in this method, you actually have to convince people that don't even know you to invest in your business. And so, yes, that's technically the same case for venture capital later in the journey. Like, I've met my investors often, but we have a better relationship. They're not just investing without getting to know me, without any calls, without any presentation pitches, whereas in crowdsourcing, people are. So if you're going down that road, it's definitely to think about your narrative. You have to actually run a campaign and a timely one and structure it as such. So you can imagine how time consuming that can be, but it has been helpful and has helped many people who otherwise would not have been able to get funding for their companies to be able to continue to operate. And then there's loans. And so obviously there's traditional and untraditional loans. There's also debt financing, which is something I don't have on here, but sometimes people do a mix of venture capital and debt financing as well. And we all here probably know what are loans, traditional or untraditional. Oftentimes when you see companies who are bootstrapping and they get really, really large, and they haven't taken venture capital or investments, oftentimes they have leveraged loans from banks or other institutions or other type of debt financing. And so just kind of an overview of those specific things. When we think about raising venture capital, so pivoting a little bit from the idea of bootstrapping and to raising venture capital, because most of you probably like, but tell us about the venture capital. And so for me, I already talked about how I went about raising capital. I've raised the pre-seed, seed round, and Series A. And as you can imagine, each of them grew in size. So 400 to 2 million to 8 million over 3 courses, over 3 rounds. And so when you're thinking about raising capital, obviously you're starting at where you are. I have another slide here, which I'll see if I can send this out to anyone listening in after this call, but it kind of talks about like how startup funding works, right? And so you're at this idea stage, that perhaps you're at a co-founder stage. I don't have a co-founder, but early on, you may be looking for a co-founder. Then from there, as you start raising capital, you're looking at family and friends, right? Some people call this family, friends, and fools, just primarily because your company is so early and just at the idea stage, it probably doesn't have any revenue and people are betting on you. And so generally these people are people that you know. They say family and friends. My first investments didn't come from family or friends, but they were definitely in this angel category. Then from there, you move to the seed round, Series A. And so you can think about this growth, right, stages of your companies from idea stage to IPO or acquisition, whatever your means of liquidity look like. And so as you go through those stages, what your investors look like will also change. And then the valuation of your company will change as well. And so ideally, your valuation will continue to go up as you bring in more revenue, as you build the team, as you grow out your business idea to actual concept, minimum viable product, pushing into market, landing contracts if you're in SaaS like myself, or if you're a consumer, adding more and more volume to your platform of customers. And so definitely this gives a good description of how venture capital works or startup capital works, and happy to share this after as well. One thing I will note here is that when you're thinking about how your company is broken up, at the very beginning, you have 100%. And so just think about that when you're raising capital, is that you start with 100% and then you start chopping up your company with every dollar you raise. And then you have this option pool, which is what you utilize for your first employees and your team to entice them to come join a startup and leave their big cushiony job, or maybe even leave their own company to come help you start yours. One thing I will also note attached to this other slide is how to find the right investors. People often ask me like, oh, how did I find my investors? At first, it wasn't quite easy just because of the location I am in. But I will say when I began to hone in on investors that fit my criteria, the right investors started coming to me as well. I also participated like in a few programs, accelerators, and they introduced me to investors aligned to my segment and type, which for me is SaaS, enterprise, which is has grown significantly over the past decade. And then also who I really aligned with was investors investing outside of Silicon Valley. I remember when I first came out on the investment scene, when I first started to raise capital, I was in Louisiana, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, and my head was down. I was focused on revenue, building MVP, and we had successfully done that. And so I was like, oh, perfect. We have this product. We, of course, can go out here and raise capital and fly to the West Coast, and we would be able to get in front of all these investors and they would give us capital. And it did not happen like that. We've actually had more success with investors who invest outside of Silicon Valley, which, you know, I think Cliff was on here earlier from Cultivation. He's one of our larger investors. They invest across the Midwest and Southeast, and Mucker Capital, which is one of my investors. They're actually out of LA, so on the West Coast, but their thesis is also they invest anywhere except for Silicon Valley. We have some other angels. Kim, I know she was on a panel earlier, she is a LP in another fund that invested in me. They invest in the Southeast, and they heavily invest into female-led companies. And so I would definitely tell anyone to be very strategic about the type of investors that you're going after, and to really be strategic about where they're located, and then what's their thesis on where they give. Because I do feel that the demographic and proximity will give you a better chance than going after Silicon Valley investors who literally get thousands of deals across their table every month. Something, tips from investor pitching for me early on was to keep my presentation within 20 minutes. So trying to keep my slides down to like 10 or 12 slides. And if individuals are interested in the 10 to 12 slide presentation when you're initially pitching an investor, they will invite you back, right? So they'll invite you back to continue the process of diligence, due diligence, and to learn more about your company. And there you'll get more specific around the details of your company. And so definitely be able to just like clearly state what you're doing in a concise way. And it's probably one of the best tips I can give for investor pitching. And then also how you can communicate your narrative strongly that proves that you are the right person to be building this company, and that you are capable of actually building a team of people who want to follow you in this journey of building this company. And so that aligned with your market being sizable enough, and other things we want to keep in mind for investor pitching. I don't have the 10 slides here, but if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to send that over. And also, I actually have my first pitch deck on my website. So if you want to just download my actual pitch deck, you can go to sevetriwilson.com and actually download my pitch deck there, or shoot me an email. And here's a continuation of what I was previously talking about, using storytelling to make your pitch stand out, give your startup a more personal feel, try including testimonials or real life examples, close your presentation with some kind of call to action. And so these are some key things that I used that I felt I was successful in crafting my pitch in a way that investors received well, and that generally moves me to pitch my first pitch to due diligence and investment. And so here are a few things I'm wrapping up, and we'll get to Q&A if anyone has questions. But a few actions you can take now to really get you moving if you're looking to raise capital. Join Slack channels. So I'm a part of a few Slack channels just for startup companies and channels with other founders. And so there are definitely a few out there that might be beneficial to you. Some of them are demographic based as well. So there may be like founders in the Southeast. Facebook groups. So there are definitely a lot of Facebook groups that are specifically for startup founders, or maybe demographic wise. But even for me, I joined a Facebook group that was just a group of like San Francisco, Silicon Valley founders. And it was very insightful for me, because just listening to what the things that they were concerned about, listening to the conversations, the events that they were attending, actually brought value to me and perspective as well. Consider your business model and ability to assess customers without capital. And I know because I get a lot of messages about this, it's like, oh, I have this idea, I want to raise capital. Can you introduce me to investors? And like, oh, yeah, good luck with that. Unless if you have an idea and you need to raise capital, and you can raise capital off an idea, then you already know your investors. For everyone else, you're gonna have to get out here and network and connect with people, build an MVP, write a pitch deck, put together a pitch deck. It's gonna be a little bit more complicated than going from idea to raising capital, unless you already have access to that capital. Also, some sites that I found helpful here, firstround.com. So First Round is an early stage VC fund. But one thing about them is that they constantly push out educational tools to the public. And then Y Combinator is another one. And so recently, myself and a group of other founders were talking about like investment memos, and how some of my founder friends actually didn't raise funding with a pitch deck. They actually created an investor memo or found a memo for themselves and utilized that. And so you can go to websites like firstround.com or Y Combinator and literally just type in anything you're thinking and an example will pop up. And then finally, again, you can go to my website, sevetriwilson.com, sign up for our newsletter. And I also include downloadables from everything from like my original pricing sheet when I was bootstrapping to my first pitch deck. So these are just some places and spaces where you can find additional resources. For the most part, if you can think of it, you probably could find some type of research or access information regarding it. And that concludes this presentation. I want to thank everyone for having me here, and I hopefully have been able to share some key components in my journey that might be helpful to anyone needing motivation to continue to bootstrap or start bootstrapping a company, or some motivation to raise capital and how to particularly begin that process as well. And so I will stop here and see if there are any questions for me.
Sevetri, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was extraordinarily comprehensive, and you shared a lot of messages that a lot of entrepreneurs need to hear, because we hear too often that people think there's only one way to raise capital, and you really brought in a very holistic view, and I'm very grateful that you've shared your wisdom in that. We do have a couple questions. I had a question. You commented specifically about finding the right fit of investor. And I see that as one of the keys to success in general across all of our entrepreneurs. But the piece that I don't know is, how did you find those investors? Did you just do a Google search and just absolutely just start to try to research them one by one? Or was there any other sort of resource that you went to?
Yeah, a few. So I know everyone's at home right now, but conferences were really helpful to me. Now all these conferences are virtual. And so by way, you can tap into conferences or like summits where investors are speaking at. I think that opens up your eyes to not only the investor lens, but who are kind of like the players in the space. Also connecting with other founders. And so I've found it helpful to connect with other founders who had potentially raised some money. And so generally now everybody releases a press release when they raise capital. And so going to see like where they raise capital and then seeing if those particular companies actually are in line to where your company is, right? So if you're pre-seed, seed, or Series A, and then also what sector it's in. So are those things aligned? And then finally, I always talk about this, like where pitch competitions and accelerators and programs are helpful, right? And so there's so many now, you kind of have to figure out which ones are good, which ones are a waste of time, which ones are perfectly aligned with you, because I also met a few of my investors via these type of accelerators and programs. And that network effect amongst investors, a lot of them know each other, particularly in the same, at the same stage and level of investment. And then also don't actually underestimate what storytelling can do to help get your company on the map. So I know friends who actually met investors because they met them on Twitter, right? I literally know a friend that raised like all this capital on Twitter. And so being engaging on Twitter, talk about your business on Twitter, and connect with investors on Twitter, because if you want to know where the investors are at, they're on Twitter. They're all on Twitter. There's literally a VC community, and sometimes it's overwhelming, but they're giving a lot of unsolicited advice and some solicited.
Thank you for that. We do have a few investors that are part of our conference. We have Cliff Holcamp with Cultivation Capital and Kim Seals.
Which is one of my investors.
And Kim Seals with the Jump Fund.
Which is also one of my investors.
And Bill Ellison with Innovation Catalyst. And Abe Mikara with Legacy Night. He was on our panel just before yours. So they're all people that are interested in the South, but I'm always interested in like, how can we like build that list faster? So those are fascinating and excellent suggestions. Give me a second, I gotta go read my questions and I'll be right back, hang on.
Yeah, and Kelly Capital also here in Louisiana. They're actually another one of my investors, and they're between Thibodeau and New Orleans, and they're writing investors checks of $1 million plus into companies right here in Louisiana.
Fantastic. That's right. Calais Capital. That's right. And anyone that, and I'm going to do a shameless plug for our organization. Anyone that is looking to raise capital, we have an investment readiness program that will work with an investor, or sorry, that'll work with a founder and make sure they're ready to seek investment, or give them advice on other options if possible. But also once they're ready, we can then make introductions to investors that are in our network. So we're willing to help with all of those. So another question that came in is that often entrepreneurs try to obtain funding from pre-revenue firms. Can you speak to strategies these pre-rev firms specifically can employ to raise funds?
Yes, and so the idea, generally pre-revenue companies have a couple of different things. If you're pre-revenue, but you have a product, right, then generally you will be attracting pre-seed angels or pre-seed funders. So I believe maybe a couple months ago, I was actually on a call with an individual who invests at Precursor. And Precursor, they invest in pre-seed, pre-revenue companies. And so they are out here. I will say that they're harder to find, but again, if you don't have any revenue, you have to at least have something to demonstrate why your company could be successful. But even more important is why you are the person to build this company. That's where it matters 100% if an investor connects with you as a founder.
That's right. That was Charles Hudson, wasn't it?
Yes, Charles.
Yes, so he was on our panel in September, and he did say that he passed on you, and he regretted that.
He did. You see what happened? Yeah.
You were one of his one of his many regrets. He was like, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And
yes, we pitched him and I was like, yeah, at pre-seed.
Yeah. So another question is, you mentioned early in your presentation, the importance of networking. Any recommendations on how best to do this?
So for me, because I didn't have like a natural network, you can leverage. So say I went to LSU, and so I've always kind of been like a true, just like meeting people, right? And you'd be surprised, like even from that, like my professors gave me so much knowledge and wisdom, particularly more of my entrepreneurial professors or who were in business, because as professors, like they're not professors outside of work, they're like regular people who have other interests. But then after that, joining organizations, right? And so I mentioned I was a part of the Chamber of Commerce. I was involved in probably like a number of other, and still am, but just getting involved in other organizations. Like I spoke at Junior League. I just joined this women's organization recently. And so by way, you can connect with organizations where you can meet people. This opens up your network and it puts you in front of people that you may not even realize can help you at the time. But when you start talking, people are like, oh, I actually know someone that does this, or someone that might be interested in that. So just expanding the organizations that you're a part of is a first step to networking. And then reaching out to people like Rod West, who is the president of Entergy. I was having a conversation with a friend and he was like, yeah, this Rod is great. He's over at Entergy. Now, he did not give me his email address, but what he said to me resonated with me and I felt that he could help me. And so I literally like Googled his email, trying to figure it out. Found it somewhere, some presentation that was online, and I emailed him. And he was like, yeah, he was like, I don't know how you got past my guards, my gatekeepers, but come on, I'll introduce you to my assistant and she'll schedule a meeting. And he's been one of my closest advisors ever since.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, sometimes you can guess corporate email addresses if there's a pattern to them. Yeah, I have those tricks myself. So very good. Speaking of connection, just as a reminder to our attendees, it's hard to connect right now in this era of virtual events. So please take advantage of that one-on-one and be sure to check for either an email or for a little red dot at the top, because someone might be trying to meet with you and you need to actually respond and say yes. And even if you're not a meter kind of a person, like kind of intimidates you, just give it a try, because it's hard to meet people. And these cameras are kind of all we have right now. So don't let the virtual world stop you from that. Let's find another question. How do you pitch a proof of concept without fear of someone stealing your idea?
So the idea, so I remember when I first started my business, that assumption was like in my head, but it was quickly removed because I just realized that most people can't even execute their own idea. So the fact that they're going to execute your idea, like the chances are just so low that it's minimal, you know. Later on, you'll get into like the idea of like NDAs, and you can do those early on as well. But an investor, someone at pre-seed, early stage, unless they're a direct competitor, which unlikely they will be at that stage, won't even sign an NDA. So yeah, I think that you want certain people to sign NDAs, like software engineers, people that's building your actual product. But when it comes to like you sending me a deck, I don't have the energy or the time to put into stealing someone else's idea. And so I would worry less about that.
Very true, very true. So regarding loans, what are your thoughts on SBA-backed loans, and how would you choose going the loan route versus venture capital?
So I do think that, well, first of all, in order to get, there are certain boxes you have to check in order to get loans, right? And generally speaking, if you can check those boxes, then your company is probably in a position to take on a loan, because a lot of businesses just can't access loans because of many reasons. They haven't been in business long enough. They haven't shown profitability. So there's a number of reasons why you can't access a loan. However, if your business is healthy and you can see where this loan will really go to work and help you like pay and staff people, will help you be able to take on larger contracts, because at some point you're going to need capital in some form or fashion if you're going to continue to grow. And so whereby you're taking out loans and you can see directly how that loan is going to help you build your business or help you get cash that you may need, then I'm pro taking out loans. Where I'm pro capital is your company scalable, right? And so most venture capitalists will say, do you have essentially like $1 billion idea, right? Or could this business could sell for a couple $100 million, or could it IPO? If you fit that category, in which there are certain things that have to happen for you to accomplish $1 billion, to see an IPO or to hit $1 billion, most likely is via venture capital. And in order to get there, you need to hire a team of engineers, you need to hire a sales team, and you taking out loans just probably isn't going to be the best route to do that.
Good point. Good point. So I'm looking for, I saw another one in here. Can you share a piece of advice that you wish you had known early on?
I'm assuming raising capital. So I'll just stay on that lens. So early on, we're raising capital past like that initial angel stage. I would have began to network sooner. So there's your network that you need to access angel capital, which may be like your local network. But when you're in the South and you say you want to raise 10s, 20s or more $1 million, the capital just isn't here in Louisiana. Let's be real. We're gonna get there though, right? But today it's just not there, where like most of the companies that I know who've raised over 10, $20 million have had to access outside capital as well to do so. But that means you have to access a whole new network of people. And for me, I would have done that a lot faster, versus being like, okay, we're going to raise a seed, which is one of the hardest rounds to raise, and just like go out there and do it. And so that's something I would have done differently. I would have started networking outside of my region, outside of just Louisiana, a lot sooner than I did.
It takes a little bit of foresight, because you have to realize I'm going to need a Series C investor, therefore I should network now, because that takes a lot of gumption to say I'm going to be raising that $50 million at some point in the future.
Yeah. So that's up to that point. One thing they will tell you that I also learned late is that once you start raising capital, the expectation is that you continue to raise capital. So even today, I probably have 3 calls a week with investors who are interested in like future rounds for me. Whether or not you realize, whether or not you actually go out and raise it, that's another thing. But just know, once you start taking on investor capital, the expectation is that you'll raise another round. Like seed investors investing you because one, they think you have a business idea that can work, but two, they also are looking forward to your ability to raise a Series A to continue to grow the company. So yeah, be mindful of your expectations to raise capital once you start.
Wise advice, wise advice. I saw that graphic that you shared where 100% of nothing is a whole lot less than 17% of a billion.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so each time you do raise, you are losing a little bit, but you're also gaining something because the company's growing.
Right.
So as a female founder and woman of color, did you face any specific challenges? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes. So there was this graphic put out by CBI maybe a couple months ago, and they looked at every state and who raised the most money, which female founder raised the most money in each state. And there I was in Louisiana, like the dot on Louisiana, and we only raised $10 million, right? And so that just tells you how challenging it is as a female founder and a female founder of color to just raise capital anywhere. I should have put that graphic on my thing so you could just see the disparity across the entire country. But to like just see my little name like in Louisiana by itself, it's like, man, we have so much work to do. And so hopefully I won't be the last dot. I won't be the last dot for long with other female founders being able to raise capital. Because I think that hopefully we're figuring out like, okay, what is the science behind the issues that women face? Obviously, there are a number of different reasons. I could tell you so many stories, but I won't do that today.
Did you find a difference in receptivity when you were talking to an investing team that had either women or investors of color on their staff or in their investing decision group?
Yeah, revenue is the great equalizer, right? Because yes, I've had success with funds founded by women and women was leading the investment group, but I've also recently pitched in, I pitched in rooms where it was just literally almost all white men and also walked out with investment. Whereas I would say a couple of years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. And so that's why I feel that revenue is like the great equalizer. When it comes to that stage. The issue is, how do we get companies founded by people that look like me to that stage where they can have a revenue, where people can focus on just the numbers, because there are so many other founders that get capital before that stage, right? And by way, if we don't get the capital to be able to focus our conversations on revenue, then we never get to a Series A, Series B plus stage of growth for our companies. And so getting investors to invest in women of color earlier on, and I'm still early, but definitely I think that's the biggest hurdle.
Definitely. Yeah. Seed capital is a challenge for Louisiana entrepreneurs in general. And I think it's probably just compounded and exacerbated for both female investors, female entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of color. Probably just one or two more questions. How important was Founder Jim to your VC prep and introductions?
So I was actually like one of the first people in Founder Gym, the first cohort. And what I've learned is that it has drastically changed. And so if you're going into Founder Gym today, I think that your experience would be a lot different than mine. Just because I think there's like more access to other investors. But for me, I found like the value in my cohort, so the people that I met in Founder Gym, the most. But again, this was like 15 cohorts ago, so it might has like changed drastically than what it is today.
So Barrett Blondo is asking a question, and he's one of our companies that's pitching for the high stakes pitch. So you know that he's very, he's fundraising right now. He's asking, how did you start your seed round? How did you get that first check? Any advice?
Oh my gosh, it was crazy circumstances. But it's interesting that you're about to pitch because the check that turned my seed round around actually came from a guy named Tim Milliken, who is a partner at TPG Capital. And so I met Tim because I was pitching at New Orleans Entrepreneur Week for Coulter Pitch, which Jim Coulter is one of the founders of TPG Capital. His wife is from New Orleans, so that's the connection there. And I was pitching and I lost. But in the pitch, Tim had heard my presentation on a practice call, a virtual practice call. And I followed up, the next day, like, sorry guys to lose this one for the team, but, thank you for your help. And then Tim reached back and was like, hey, if you're ever in San Francisco, let me know, just send me an email, we could catch up. Me not thinking anything of this, couple months later, I was going to San Francisco and I was like, well, maybe I'll look him up. And I did. And he immediately invited me out to lunch. And he was like, I really thought you had a good idea. I felt like your business was a strong model. I'm interested in investing. And so although Tim wasn't the largest check by like a long shot, like he invested maybe $50,000, something like that. Because of his name and because of who he was, I was able to use his name and his investment to raise the rest of my round. But my largest seed check actually came from Mucker Capital out of LA, and was on a call with Will, was connected to Mucker Capital through the Jump Fund, because I ironically sat across the table at a Jump Fund event across the table from one of the investors at Mucker. And she just happened to be listening into my conversation and was like, oh, I would love to introduce you to one of our partners, and did. And they ended up writing the largest check into my round, which was $800,000, which finished our $2 million raise.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can continue to foster those accidental interactions and conversations that lead to those kinds of things. But Barrett, I think the takeaway for you is just pitch. Just get up there and on stage this Thursday and pitch. Yeah. All right. Okay, so it is just a few minutes until 3. So unfortunately, there's no more time for questions. Sevetri, thank you so much for your time and your experience. And it's such a joy and pleasure to have you here. It's truly delightful.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. So to all of our attendees, this wraps up broadcast for day 1 of BREW. It flew by. Thank you to all of our speakers, moderators, and our behind the scenes event staff, the team at Nexus Louisiana, JCW, RepCap, Theater Baton Rouge. I'm so grateful to our sponsors, including Brasilia. Thank you, Sevetri. And thank you to our presenting sponsor, Lucid, and other major sponsors, Stone Pigman, High Fidelity, and Baton Rouge Business Report. So tomorrow we get started again at 9 a.m. tomorrow with welcome remarks. And at 9:30, our second keynote, Master Builder, Patrick Comer, founder and CEO of Lucid, will provide a blueprint for opening up new markets and how his company did it. This talk provides insight as to how to navigate the uncertainty of innovations that have no precedent, which is an era we are all experiencing right now. Don't forget to utilize the event platform's one-to-one video meeting options. Join us in the lounges and make plans to watch the high-stakes pitch unfold live Thursday night when 3 companies vie for a $50,000 investment prize. But for now, thank you, be well, and see you soon.